design agency in Kilkenny for digital product strategy and design. But today I have my Tech Thursday hat on. It was set up about 3 years ago in Kilkenny. It's a free monthly meetup to encourage a culture for a knowledge-based economy in Kilkenny, which is currently mainly a service-centric city and county. So we're proactive regarding having more skilled workforce, better jobs, more disposable income, which is always good, and less of the current brain drain from Kilkenny, but more on that later. So you're very welcome. It's the 9th Kilkenomics and it's the 20th Tech Thursday. Yeah. Okay, I just want to get a feel for the audience. How many people here do we have that went to Tech Thursday before? Okay, nice one. Okay, cool. People from outside Kilkenny? Okay, a few. Anyone from Limerick? Excellent. 2 on the back. Brilliant. And do we have anyone who's not been to Kilkenomics before? 2. That's strong. That's strong. So it's a repeat business. This is good. Okay. So what I want to find out now is, well, first of all, I'll give you a bit of background if you haven't been to Kilkenomics before. So it brings together some of the world's leading economists, financial analysts, and media commentators, and with some of our funniest and sharpest comedians. So Exhibit A. Sorry, I was in Michael. The Exhibit A, you have the economists and the smart people, and Exhibit B is myself. So I'll be moderating the panel. But as you know, I'm not a comedian, and the reason we don't have a comedian is that we know that comedians don't actually get up till about 2:30 a.m. So unfortunately that's how it works. So the show is called Leveraging Limerick's Success, and I can't wait to introduce you to our panel, like I said. But we're going to really talk about the Limerick 2030 plan, amongst other things. And has anyone actually heard of the Limerick 2030 plan? 1 or 2. Has anyone actually read it? 1. Unbelievable. Okay, so no research done. Okay, great. Well, you should actually have it a read because it's an amazing plan. I know it's kind of a brief synopsis of what the work that's been done. It's on your desk or on your seats there. And for me, I was impressed by the Limerick 2030 plan for three main reasons. And one was its transparency, its joined-up thinking, and its strong future vision. And from that, we've had organisations like Innovate Limerick, which Mike's involved in. And Limerick actually has the first digital officer in Ireland as well, and they're doing absolutely amazing work as well. So I'll start, I think. So, like I said, I'll be working or sitting here as your benevolent moderator. So for this, so yeah, I might be slightly influential in what's going on. So what I'll do is I'll just introduce our guests. So over on my far side here, we have Frank Crowley, who's an economist and lecturer with the University College Cork. We have Katrina Catt, who's an economist with the Chamber of Commerce, and she was previously a lecturer in UL. And we have Mike Cantwell, who's the CEO of Innovate Limerick, like I was saying, and he's also involved with the Limerick 2030 plan from its inception. And he had previously worked with the Limerick County Council, or Limerick Enterprise Board, I should say. And as well, we'll have time for questions at the end, so no button in as we're getting through all this. So plenty of time for questions. And if you want to tweet, it's at Kilkenomics and hashtag TechThursdayKK. So feel free to do that as well. So just to start with, I think, can you all just give me, let's say, a minute or two to let everyone know who you are, what you're about, your past experiences, your background, your areas of expertise. Mike, if I could start with you.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Yeah, Mike Cantwell is my name. I head up Innovate Limerick, which is one of 2 special purpose companies established by Limerick City and County Council in 2014 to take on projects outlined in the Limerick 2030 plan, Limerick regeneration plans and others. So types of projects we would have worked on over the last couple of years would have been Troy Film Studio, the N21 Business Centre in Rathkeale, which was a former Anderson jewellery plant. We converted that into a 120,000 square feet enterprise centre. The development of Engine, which is a city centre, fixed and flexible workspace, where we have our monthly tech talks and that as well. We're in the process of developing a digital collaboration, corporate digital collaboration centre there. And so we work as part of the economic development unit within Limerick City and County Council. And 2030 is a separate company which is tasked with taking on the 5 main projects that are outlined in the Limerick 2030 plan. I can talk a bit about those in a little bit more detail.
Katrina.
Okay, so I'm currently the economist for the Limerick Chamber. I'm only actually in the role about a month. So I was previously in the public sector before that. I was a lecturer for 5 years in the University of Limerick in the economics department. So some would say I've gone to the dark side recently by moving to the private sector. And I don't know if I'd agree with that, but anyway, that's a different argument. But I suppose currently I'm driving policy within the Limerick Chamber. We have about 450 members that we represent across various different industries. Within my own research, it's very much focused upon public enterprise, transport economics, and I've also looked at productivity analysis within companies. So yeah, kind of.
Thanks, Frank.
Okay, so I'm a lecturer from UCC. I suppose I'm there for 12 years now, so big part of my role is obviously teaching, but also doing research. And so my research background is in the area of economic geography, or kind of spatial economist. So I'm very much interested in the role of space, right? So which I suppose is very important for explaining innovation patterns, competitiveness, particularly around, you know, winning cities, losing cities, you know, I suppose places that are being forgotten about, things like that, right? So they're kind of my primary research areas.
Okay, great. And so back to Mike, can you take a few minutes actually just to tell us all about the Limerick 2030 plan, how it came to be, how it was developed, and where it's going? He tells us lovely.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I suppose it came out of kind of a dark day when I suppose initially Dell, who was the biggest employer in Limerick at the time, which was about 2008, 2009, announced 2,000 redundancies. And I suppose we thought that that was going to be 2,000 redundancies over a period of maybe 2 or 3 years. But what happened was it was 2,000 redundancies in the space of 2 or 3 months. Directly, you had another 2,500 jobs who were in the supply chain directly into Dell, and then you had about another 4,000 jobs that were knocked down directly because of the closure. So, in total, within the Midwest and certainly Limerick felt the brunt of about in the space of a 6-month period, 8,000 to 9,000 job losses, which left you know, at a time 2009, 2010, the economy was already in recession. It left us in a very dark place, and something kind of had to be done. And it was a rallying call really to say, well, look, what can we do? Because there was no knight in shining armor going to come in. The property market was broke. There was no money coming in to buy sites. No investment going on. So, in fairness to Dennis Brosnan was appointed to head up a group of other professionals to look at kind of Limerick Inc. and say, well, look, what can you do to fix it, or how could it be fixed? Is it possible to fix it? And so some very senior people joined that group, and I suppose the recommendation at the time, the main recommendation from that group was to bring together the city and county councils. And to me, that was the probably single biggest thing over the last 5 to 10 years that has marked kind of our renaissance. So in 2014, as a recommendation of that group, in fairness to the local members, voted to bring together the city and county council into one local authority. And since then, you know, I suppose under the guidance of Con Murray, who is himself kind of an entrepreneur, we've gone from strength to strength. But the plan was launched. The 2030 plan itself was developed after a certain amount of research, and the plan focused on Limerick City itself rather than city and county. It focused on some key sites within the city. I think the view was strong city, strong region. And at that time, we were able to purchase some key sites within the city at very substantially knocked down rates. And so now, as part of the plan, and Limerick 2030 company is now heading that side of it up, they're focusing on 5 key sites. One of them, which is Troy Studios, which was developed by Innovate, and we handed the property over to them. The Cleve site, which is currently up for planning development. In the Gardens International, which is a city centre site that was half built, and construction will be finished on that site at the end of, within the next month or two, and that's already over 50% let, and you'll have 700 people working in that building on completion early next year. And then you have the Opera Centre, which will be going in for planning in the next 2 or 3 months, potentially for about 3,000 jobs in city centre, and an apart hotel. And then housing then is out in Mungret, as part of Mungret College, a 100-acre site. They've taken that on to do it. And so from an Innovate Limerick point of view, what we have done is we work with companies that are coming in that want to invest in Limerick, to I suppose, we try and help them to scale. We bring them in start them small, let them grow so that they're ready to move into these properties. And that's the approach we've taken that's worked very successfully for us. So with companies like WordPress, WP Engine, Stats, and a number of others that have come in, we've got we work very closely with the IDA, Enterprise Ireland, and that to incentivize these companies, give them a helping hand, and make them grow. And I think we were very, very reliant on Dell, but everybody recognised that at the time. And now we have a strong pharma sector, we have a strong engineering sector, we now have a very strong up and coming film sector with amazing stuff coming down the track there. And we've put our eggs into a lot of baskets.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think lots of eggs, lots of baskets.
Yeah.
Okay, good. That's great. I want to go back to Katrina. Actually, you just mentioned there that your role is an economist in the chamber. So you the first economist in the village of chambers across Ireland.
I'm probably the first where the title economist has been used, but I wouldn't be the first to have an economic background. But my role as an economist within the Limerick Chamber, it replaced what was previously referred to as the Director of Policy. And I was partly encouraging of that change because the Director of Policy just seemed to be kind of an over-exaggerated kind of title. You know, I knew what I was a director of, but like director of who was the question, because like I'm a one-woman team in terms of the policy and driving the policy. But I think the most important thing was that by having the economist title, it showed that the chamber was moving in a new direction, focused around policy. Because what we're finding now is that like we've a fantastic relationship with Limerick City and County Council. You know, they're very open to discussing with us because we do have 450 members and we are a voice for the businesses in our region. And the important thing is that when we're driving policy, and it goes across such, it's head wrecking sometimes, it goes across such a broad compass of different things that we have to take into account, and having data and statistics and the quantitative analysis done before we go and talk to the overall decision makers is very, very important, and it makes the whole process much more efficient.
Right. Okay. And would you, and just for yourself then, do you have any aspirations yourself in the chamber that you'd like to see change yourself, or things you'd like to do differently coming from an economist background? Right. I know, how long are you in the job?
4 weeks.
Come on.
Yeah. I definitely have ideas, but I'm kind of, I didn't want to come in and start like changing the place up, because there's a fantastic team in the chamber already who've been there ranging from 10 years up until 2 years, and like they've done magnificent work over the last 5 years in particular. So I want to learn from them as well, but purely under the policy umbrella, and what I see my role hopefully being in the next year or 2 years is the fact that we need to rely on data sets. The actual sourcing of data sets in various sectors of the business is very poor. We're not strong in that regard.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what these data sets are?
Yeah, so like even if you think about it on a larger scale, so Central Statistics Office, like, you all heard about the debacle earlier on in the year when the housing stock was overstated, and they said it was 70,000, and then it turned out when the CSO stepped in it was 53,000. So we're still at a point where we have very important data sets that we're updating, and we're using different types of analysis and quantitative statistics in order to put these data sets together. But within Limerick City, if members within the chamber who, let's say, are within the IT sector come to me and they want a profile on the city in terms of that particular market, or the Midwest region for that particular market, it's very difficult to actually give them quantitative statistics and backgrounds. So what I'm hoping to do over the next year or two is to bring all of the members together and to utilise them in terms of getting access to data so that we can build a comprehensive data set that everybody can benefit from. Because if a company has a data set, like I'll give you an example. So AIB collects how people use their debit cards. And they break it down based on age profiles. Now, of course, they've anonymised this data, but they're starting to share it just to show retail stores in the region, what age profile is coming into your shop, what times are the most popular times for this groupings, and I think that's brilliant, and I think I would like to see that spread out wider across the different sectors and the different industries. So if we have a unit which is the Limerick Chamber that drives that and draws it together, I think it could be an excellent resource for all of the businesses within the Midwest region going into the future.
Okay. Frank, I'm going to come to you next on kind of a macro view. So, and like from your, I suppose your experience, development in Ireland and Europe looks becoming more of a capital city region driven approach. For places like Kilkenny, which isn't the capital, or it's nowhere near the size of Limerick, what kind of things should we be looking at in terms of the smaller cities, and can they actually survive this kind of onslaught of serious investment and great things happening in other counties?
Yeah.
Are we fucked?
Yeah, I know. That's such a difficult question because when we look at what's going on even in Europe, if we look at the cities that are really thriving, we can see that capital cities are diverging. They're moving away from. They're performing better than other cities. You can even there's an axis going on in terms of you have Dublin, London, you have Paris, then we have Germany, Amsterdam, Brussels, all that area. Then you have the northern cities of Italy, and it's kind of like a line driven across it. And what these cities have is that they're very large, high population, and critically they have very high density. And so what we see in a world where when knowledge, for new innovations to happen, knowledge is becoming very complex, and so people need face-to-face interaction. They need to learn from one another, and there's a real learning effect going on within these cities. So I suppose from an economic geography perspective, these types of cities are basically they're sucking the life out of their I suppose the landscape, and people are they're acting like a magnet really for people and for firms. So when you're thinking about the likes of Dublin, even Dublin is a small city when you start thinking about it on the global stage. Tokyo, 30 million, London was a 14 million. So you've got 2 million in Dublin, and that's just the national context. Then you're looking at, well, what's the role of Cork and Limerick and Kilkenny? There's no point. We must accept that they are suffering from these place disadvantages straight away because they don't have high density, they don't have the critical mass that capital cities do have or larger cities do have. And so I suppose the strategies then in trying to make them successful is complicated. But what we do seem to find happening is that a lot of these larger cities, they're suffering from what we call agglomeration diseconomies. So congestion, commuting to work takes an awful long time, crime, pollution, and so what we seem to be finding at the moment is that there's kind of provincial cities may have a bigger role than we think in the future, and that's kind of around the area of livability. And also, I suppose if they can get a comparative advantage in particular sectors, particularly localized, what we call localized agglomerations, which is having really good knowledge bases in a number of maybe small number of sectors, that they are more competitive then. Okay. So just going back to what Mike said about having a lot of eggs and having a lot of baskets, actually probably that would not be a very successful model to follow, because there's definitely going to be way more eggs and way more baskets in the likes of Dublin, and there's going to be way more eggs and way more baskets in the likes of London and vice versa. So really what you're looking for is with these types of cities is to be very successful maybe in a few industries where they have knowledge that other cities, diverse cities, can't compete with, and therefore you're attracted because of this unique knowledge base that they have. So in terms of what you look at in these areas is that, well, in the European model, they're taking kind of more smart specialization approach And what that means is basically you're looking at what are the unique knowledge bases that already exist within the city, what can you build upon, and basically it's related diversification. So it is about other baskets, it is about other eggs, but it has to be related to the knowledge base that already exists within the city.
Yeah, just that boost to get it going.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to come back to something that Frank was saying earlier on. It kind of relates into what you're saying as well about. I had read an article by yourself, Frank, in the RT on the RT website, and it was about first wave and second wave of automation. And the first wave of automation was where manufacturing is dying off because things can be manufactured somewhere else. And as an example of the first wave of automation there, you have Dell, which Limerick had back in the day, and the IDA had pushed Limerick to be very much a manufacturing centric base and mainly just manufacturing. What happened is that, well, Dell happened, and that was an issue. And the second wave is related to quite possibly dramatically affect the service-centric centres. So I think it's something you'd mentioned, like Frank, you were saying that the second wave is where a lot of the things that you have in terms of work, let's say in Kilkenny, you have food, you have retail, all these service-centric things, that about in the next 10 years, 20% of those jobs could be lost through automation.
Well, yeah.
Or do you need some OCD figures?
Well, the OECD would predict that presently,
right.
But 8.5% of employment can actually be replaced already.
Yeah.
And that another 23% would be at risk of being replaced. Now these are more kind of low-skilled jobs, all right. I suppose when you do think about Kilkenny, it is very service-centric. In some ways, that's a really a strength too, right? In the sense that this is where the knowledge base lies for Kilkenny in some ways. And even just with some of the examples, we can see that even the service-centric is spilling over to other areas in the sense that, you've innovations in kind of more service type, experimental type goods like Kilkenomics. Next week, I think, is their subtitle festival, and then there's an animation festival. And, these are spillovers, and what they do is they get in a lot of talented people, actually, right? So,
we need to leverage them more than when they come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I suppose immediately when you look at the likes of Kilkenny, one of the biggest problems is that there's not a university.
Yes.
And particularly in this region.
There is, yeah. So just crossing on that one.
Yeah.
At the last Kilkenomics we were talking, and Bill Black said he just got up on stage and talked about what Kilkenny did. And he said, "Get a university, good night." You know what I mean? He really thought that was the way forward.
Well, like there's four key things, right?
Yeah.
You either have critical mass, which is what I said at the start, what all these capital cities and large cities have. Where am I going now? You either need beautiful scenery,
great,
right? Or you you need a university, or you need an apparition. So it's so if we can get a few statues moving around the place.
We could bring that into the next century, something else.
Yeah. So Kilkenny is suffering from those place disadvantages at the moment, I think, in the sense that, it is tied to, I suppose, the weakest performing city in Ireland, which is Waterford, which is also a problem.
Yeah.
But it's on the right side of the island.
Okay.
So
from Dublin, you mean, is it?
Well, it's it's in the southern eastern part. It's not in the Midlands. I can see this part of the island being more successful just because it has an awful lot more of the ingredients that you require.
Okay.
That southeast economic report that came out, that didn't show much hope though. It was kind of a very
what you do have
depressing read.
It's a depressing read. Yeah, you have it on. It's on all your seats or most of your seats. It's a kind of an economic report that came out from Waterford, from economists there in the WIT, and then we have another report there as well from. It's a report on. I think it's the influx of fresh blood into Kilkenny, etc. So those two reports you can have a look at them later on, but it's quite positive actually. The one of the influx of the younger people coming in and working in kind of high skilled jobs, and it's great. But that is kind of qualitative data. It's quite small, so it's just talking to a bunch of, let's say, 100 or 200 people, and saying what things are happening. And even in that report, if you read it, I think it's page 16 or something, or 6, it has a mention of where the jobs are, and it is like ICT is quite high, but retail is quite next to it, you know, for the influx of people. And then the other report, which is from Waterford, is it's more quantitative data. It's based on, you know, reports from the government, etc. And yeah, it is. I mean, it is quite damning, and I think it's something in Kilkenny where you have to at some point say, you know, what I feel sometimes when I talk about things, people go, "It's great, geez, we're flying it here, it's good, you know, I'm shovel ready, let's bring in some new stuff, you know." But Limerick, what happened when Dell went, they went, we're in big trouble, like we need to move fast.
But just coming back on some of the things that were said there in relation to Dell was used, as I mentioned a few times. But as was Dell still employ between 800 and 1,000 people in Limerick.
Right.
But they've changed from being a manufacturing facility to an IT facility and a worldwide service provider. But even in those 1,000 jobs, we talk to senior executives in Dell, they're saying that unless staff upskill, 40% of them will be redundant within 3 years. That's the level of change and automation that's coming down the track. And so there's a lot of work going on between all of the multinationals in that area to upskill existing staff, because they won't have a job unless they do. And a mile down the road from Dell is General Motors, and General Motors started with 5 people 4 years ago in Limerick, and they now have 250, heading towards 300 people employed. And that's part of the clusters that we're now developing between General Motors and Shannon. You have Jaguar Land Rover.
Yeah, I saw that there.
Other companies then that are developing chips and all that type of thing going on. But that's happening because 40% of the staff that General Motors took on were long-term unemployed, and they brought them in, trained them up using existing Springboard funded programs, gave them a job at the end of it, and they're working out really, really well for them. It's the most successful example of getting people back to work that were long-term unemployed.
I think it creates great employees as well if you upskill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they've gone from, as I said, from 5 to 250 in the space of 3 to 4 years, and that's developing software for cars. And the next thing that's coming down the track, obviously, is the driverless vehicles. And if anyone in the room can figure out how a car can sense hailstones, they'll be a millionaire in the morning, because that's the biggest problem they have. And so, being based in the Midwest, where you have lots of hailstones, is a simple but very, very important part in the development of autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, and that's really important, because I know the head of CEO of, not CEO, but the head of Jaguar in Shannon. What's his name? I can't think of his name.
John Dixon is General.
But he was saying, like, you know, they're doing R&D.
Yeah.
It's mainly R&D that Jaguar are doing. He was saying that, like, the reason we came to the West was that you've got windy roads, adverse weather, and sheep. He said sheep were great for, you know, instead of better kill a sheep than a person.
Yeah, they've access to runways. Yeah. The other thing too that I suppose people are moving back is because quality of life.
Yeah.
You know, you can get an affordable house. You have more disposable income, and that's a huge pull for people moving back into the areas. And one thing that Limerick has done, apart from plans and everything else, is, you know, we go out and we meet companies on their home turf. So we've been to Austin, we've been to New York, we've been to China, we work very closely with the IDA and Enterprise Ireland and all the agencies, and we help them. But we don't sit back and wait for them to come to us. We go and actually go and talk to them and say, look, we're open for business. Yeah. And then the delegation arrives, and that's how you coax them in.
Yeah, so
and Kilkenny can do that.
Yeah, and you should. That's it. You should go out and get them. Anyway, like I was looking at it.
You've got to go on the road.
Yeah, I mean, Mihai, who's actually the digital officer for Limerick, I was trying to find out information about him, and there's just YouTube videos of him in India and different places giving talks and finding.
He's in Trondheim this week,
just going back while we're talking about upskilling, Katrina, yesterday I seen on Twitter there was a thing called Limerick Leaders 2018. Could you tell us a little bit about that program?
Yeah, so it's basically it's this initiative to it's a passing on of skill set through collaborations with various companies that are based around the Midwest region. The role of the chamber is more so, one sense, as a facilitator. So our CEO, Dee Ryan, chaired it, or emceed it, should I say, yesterday, and James Ring would have done it previously. And it's about, like, we had Jim Flood from ExxonMobil who came out and was just discussing about, his experience with business and ideas that he brought forward in terms of when they tried to develop into international markets, and just basically talking about general skill sets and the future of the industry and how future skills has become so important. Because you can go back to what Mike said, it is something, thankfully, that is being recognised at a national level now, because we have the national planning framework, and stemming from that is there's publications coming out very soon called the Regional Economic and Spatial Strategy. And the draft plan for the East and the Midlands came out 2 days ago. And what this is geared towards is that within the national planning framework, we were given projections on population. And we have a very uneven distribution of population growth in the country. It's mostly centred around the Dublin region, the East and the Midlands, and generally about 60 to 70%. The goal of the NPF was to get a distribution of 50-50, where we would see 50% based on the 5 cities and 50% around the rest of the country. But that's not going to happen naturally. There has to be strong investment plans in place to support this, and other plans also. So this is what the RCES is feeding into. And a big element of that is actually future skills. And the whole idea of developing the connection between the educational institutions that we have in Ireland and the industries that we have in Ireland, and actually them communicating, going out to industry and finding, okay, so you've now brought your business to Ireland, or even businesses who are thinking about coming to Ireland, say, so where are you struggling with your recruitment? What areas of your business are you finding difficult to source employees? What's the skill sets that we're missing? And then teaming up with the universities in order to build programs and to develop these types of degrees that actually help us and build basically upskill and new skills going forward for RSS. So it is fantastic that is being recognised as a big component of the RSS. Now the southern one for our Limerick region hasn't come out yet, and there's been a hold up. The problem is there's some councillors on the actual assembly that signs off on it, and there's been a bit of a disagreement over some aspects of it. So we're hoping it will come out the end of November, September, so all of the plans will be out by then, and we'll have a much better idea. So yeah, the skills is a huge component, a huge element.
Okay, skills are definitely important, and I think what's really important as well is funding. Funding to do anything is definitely important. I just have some stats here. Stop me, Mike, if I'm wrong, or any of these I've just put them down wrong, but in Limerick there's the EIB funding of up to 170 million plus private. 170 million. Yeah.
170 from two. It's 85 million each from the European Central Bank and another 85 from the European Community Bank.
So Kilkenny's about the third size of Limerick, so we should get.
But Limerick was the first local authority to apply and get that funding in Ireland, and is used because it has a separate company, which is in 2030.
Yeah.
That is now the agreed mechanism, and a number of other local authorities are looking at that as a mechanism to leverage that funding.
And as well, you think like IBM came down and they invested in terms of $500,000 in terms of like looking at a smart city. But that was he going out and finding that.
We wrote the application and we went into IBM and they saw, because in relation to one side of what we're doing is the building the physical infrastructure, but also you have to look at kind of aging population and where's what is the requirement in 20, 30 years' time? Yeah. And so that was something that actually hooked IBM and kind of said, look, we like what you're doing in that space, we want to be part of it. So that's what they came to the table.
Yeah, and I think as well as like with the opera side, the European Investment Fund as well, we're saying that there's 85 million there, and their reply to the application was that you tick all the boxes. Yeah. So it's really strong team that's put together.
It's a strong team, and I suppose it's also. We can't understate too, I suppose, the fact that in order to be able to achieve this type of stuff and get that type of money, you do need strong political representation. Okay. Yeah. Because to get money at kind of 1.5%, they don't give that out if there's risk attached to it. Okay. So you do need sign off from the Department of Finance to say, well, okay, Limerick is good for that. Okay. And so we've been lucky that we had, Michael Noonan was a stalwart for Limerick for many years. Yeah. Now we have Junior Minister of Finance Patrick O'Donovan, who's doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes as well. And it is important that you have a voice around the cabinet table when you want to do that type of development. Cool.
So I suppose what I'm going to look at now then in terms of an economic term that I found, and on one side it's basically something you're trying to find something that's mutual benefit to two parties. Okay, so on one side you have, let's say, someone who can provide financial assistance and support, and then on the other side you have someone who's looking for a monetary gain with kind of, you know, realistic expectations. So does Kilkenny need a sugar daddy like Michael Dana, or someone along the line? Someone like do we need really strong political representation? Does that help make these things happen?
Well, if we go to Project 2040,
Yeah.
How many times is Kilkenny mentioned in it?
I don't know. Not
It's,
many.
like, it tells us that it's in the southeast.
Okay.
So,
It is
you know,
important, is it?
well,
Mhm.
Cork is mentioned about 80 or 90 times. Limerick, it's in the 70s.
Yeah.
You know, definitely political representation absolutely matters. I think an awful lot of the focus on Cork in particular was because of the Taoiseach, his presence there. So it absolutely matters. Now, whether Project 2040 will work or not is another thing.
Yeah.
For instance, I had a piece that said it's doomed to fail. So I'm not very optimistic about it, in the sense that,
Is it too long term?
well, I think this actually, what's interesting to look at in terms of Project 2040 and Limerick's plan,
Yeah.
is just contrasting them, in the sense that Project 2040 kind of comes up with an idea of where people are going to live, but they never address where they're going to work. You know, the world doesn't work like that. It's for the most cases, people follow jobs.
Yeah.
And the market is driving where people are going to be living. And there's no point in saying otherwise, but Dublin will suck more and more population growth relative to the other cities, just because of this critical mass alone. This idea that Dublin is overcrowded is complete nonsense. When you compare it to other cities, we're extremely low density, covering a wide space. We're just poorly planned.
Okay.
So I just want to contrast it in terms of
Yeah.
the Limerick 2030 plan, in the sense that what is interesting about that is that it absolutely addresses where people are going to work, and it is a big part of the actual plan.
It is an amazing plan, sorry.
Yeah, and when you start to, you know, I was actually, it was the first time I read it actually, I was actually completely surprised at it. Especially when you get quotations from the likes of Jane Jacobs, Richard Florida, within it. You know, that kind of starts going, there's a lot of thought gone into this actually.
Yeah.
And you get actually that story of an economic geography story through it. And using that as a framework is extremely important. And that's what Project 2040 is completely missing. It's missing that story. It's actually missing reality. And you know, that is a key critical problem, because what's going to happen is the reality is going to change over the next decade or so, and the plans for where the developments that they're saying are going to happen, they're going to go off the table. And I just don't think that's a good way of thinking about things, particularly when you're thinking about the national plan.
Yeah, I think in relation to 2030, what it also did was it laid out very, very clear targets as to what was to be achieved in relation to job creation, both in the city and the county.
Can you just give us those figures that so far?
Yeah, so at the moment there's about 12,000 jobs have been created since 2013.
5 years.
Yeah, in 5 years, and the target was to have 5,000 of those within city centre, which has been met. And I think, you know, so we're now looking at the new development plan for city and county will be is due to be written next year. So 2030 is a focus on the city. The new Limerick development plan will encompass both the city and county. Now, because the city has been the focus of quite a bit of attention and obviously investment, some of the county councillors feel a bit left out and kind of saying all the money has been sucked into the city. But yet, if you go into the rural towns like Kilkenomics, Rathkeale, Newcastle West, there's a lot of stuff going on, are starting to happen in those towns as well.
And the port as well, actually.
And in the port, who have which is a separate company, and they have big plans. But I suppose the point of this thing kind of started from a very important part in our history in Limerick was the signing of the charter by the end of 2013 between the Chamber, the three third levels, Mary Limerick IT and UL, and the local authority, which was that they all agreed to work together to achieve the targets outlined in that plan. And so the one thing that we say now when visitors come to Limerick, be it on the film side of things, be it film producers, be it companies looking to visit or whatever, the one thing that is said to us now continuously is Limerick is totally connected. We're connected to each other. So if somebody comes in and they need a road closed, or they want to get access to a site, or they need to meet somebody, it's a phone call away. Because the board of Innovate Limerick is made up of representatives of all those bodies. Everybody is just a phone call away, and that makes things happens a lot quicker. That has been part of the success that we've enjoyed.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really interesting, and also part of that success as well is that Limerick has its first digital officer, and it's the first digital officer in Ireland. And for me, I suppose, even if you go to the limerick.ie website, it just broke into 3 sections, and you can find everything you want. It's that civic area of it. It has the tourism, which is welcoming visitors, etc., and it has the business element.
Yeah.
And what I really love about the business element, and this is something that I noticed, and let's say in terms of how we project Kilkenny and how Limerick projects Limerick, is that if you go to that page on the business, straight away you get personas of the people that they're trying to attract and what they would find interesting about Limerick, and that's incredibly clever. And there's not enough people doing that. I mean, Kilkenny is talking about, look, a lot of it is just a load of guys with their shirts tucked into their underpants and suits talking about how great Kilkenny is, and I don't think that's the way forward.
We do that in Cork as well.
Do you?
Yeah, quite a lot. Yeah.
So we really have to push around, and because you should go to the Limerick.ie site and just go into that business section and just look at what they're doing there in terms of the profiles that they're creating.
And that site would hit 1 million viewers this year.
It's amazing. And can you tell us a little bit more about the Mihai? Mihai is running he's the digital officer, and what I'd love to just talk a little bit about the first thing that you said about the digital officer and what you were trying to do, and that you had to change internally.
Yeah, so the structures within the local authority, Limerick, I suppose, were led by Con Murray, the chief executive, and I've said to many people, Con is a bit of an entrepreneur himself.
Yeah.
But what he has done within so I work within the economic development team, which is headed by Dr. Pat Daly, and kind of all of the senior team within that have kind of come in from the outside. We wouldn't have, and I'm not delegating public servants about public sector myself for 20 years, but everybody within that is kind of a specialist in the area that they work. So Dr. Mihai Beluca, he's the first digital officer appointed by a local authority in Ireland. I'm head of innovation, the first kind of head of innovation appointed by a local authority. Laura Ryan is head of marketing, again, the first head of and again, her background TV3. So everybody that's at the table is kind of a specialist and a lot of experience in the area that they work.
Good hiring as well, isn't it?
Well, I suppose I can't say that, but I will agree with you, So we have a very strong team, and guys that are experts and girls that are experts in the area that they work. And it's with that team working closely together within the new structures that have been established that allows for this type of innovation. And innovation is a word that's bandied around everywhere. Yeah. But to me, it's really just about doing things a little bit differently.
Okay. I think innovation is iteration, small iteration.
Yeah. And that's what we've done. And small steps, but leading to fairly, we had the granny, which were giant steps. And these are big things that happen. I take the small steps.
Great. What else was I going to mention? I'm lost now. I had a really interesting question and now I forgot it. I suppose, it's actually going back to the whole area of then, for Kilkenny, can you think of any kind of tangible steps that Kilkenny could take in terms of moving forward, or have you looked at what's going on around Kilkenny, or have you seen examples of other cities using some sort of blue ocean strategies, or is there anything out there that Kilkenny should look at?
Well, I suppose I think one of the big problems that, just coming from a policy perspective, is that when you start thinking about places, particularly places that are struggling, and I'm not saying that Kilkenny is struggling, just if it is a story about larger cities, what does the story become about? It's kind of something that you worry about, and then what kind of interventions would you make? And kind of going back to having a lot of eggs in a lot of baskets.
Yeah.
And why you'd be worried about that is that sometimes you can focus your energies on things that actually your place is not good at. Right, that's where your knowledge bases aren't. And also particularly, I often think about it in terms of 3 types of firms. You kind of have the excited goblins, you have the hungry dwarfs, and you have the sleeping giants. Sleeping Giants are your kind of, large indigenous companies. Your Hungry Dwarfs are your small to medium term enterprises, and then your Excited Goblins are your high tech companies. And it's the Excited Goblins that always gobble up all the subsidies and get all the attention because they're exciting and people think of them as fast growth. And this is where we need to focus all our attentions on. That's fine if your city has the knowledge and the comparative advantages in those particular areas to be successful, because we're now moving into, I suppose, an era where the companies in particular are very much footloose. They're not necessarily embedded to a particular region.
Yeah.
So like ones that completely are embedded are agri-food, for instance. Very local knowledge basis. They're think about it in terms of oak trees. The roots are deep. Even when you think about, I suppose, a lot of the development that happened since the 1970s, pharmaceutical industries particularly are deep-rooted, particularly in the Cork area, for instance, would be a good example of it, in the sense that they're not going to, there's an awful lot of, there's a unique knowledge base there and a lot of human resources within the city and the labour pool that have a comparative advantage relative to other areas of the world, actually, in this particular area. And so when you're starting looking at like Kilkenny, and I know one of the things that you started out with was service-centric, but this is Kilkenny's strength in other ways. I suppose one of the areas that you'd be worried about is automation, obviously, particularly maybe the more lower skilled aspects of it.
Absolutely, because that's very much a part of it.
Yeah, but there's definitely, again, it's about related diversification. It's how can you diversify? How can you get greater added value? For instance, there's definitely a lot of quick wins that Kilkenny can do within that particular area. I don't know, there's not a 5-star hotel in Kilkenny, is there? I think there is.
Limericks, I think it's Limericks 5-star?
Oh, Limericks 5-star, okay.
Yeah.
Well, Mount Juliet is in Kilkenny.
So there.
All right, I've been told.
Yeah.
But you can have, innovation spillovers around this particular area, like festivals like this, that offer something very different. But if you look at the percentage of people that come to Kilkenny in terms of tourism, most of it is domestic.
Absolutely.
Whereas all the added value is in foreign visitors.
And that's part of Limerick strategy as well.
So you have particularly a quick win there.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of other areas, agri-food is definitely is a strength that you go to. This R&D, there's a lot of R&D in that particular area. There's an awful lot of probably untapped potential in those two particular key critical areas already.
Yeah.
Now, and we're not talking about the exciting stuff, the Excited Goblins, the high tech, which everybody focuses on. But these firms can't be successful everywhere. And they certainly can't be successful where you don't have the key resources that they require.
Yeah.
Now, we do seem to see a bit of a shift where there's kind of niche areas work in smaller places. There's stories here of, is it Cartoon Saloon?
Cartoon Saloon, absolutely.
Cartoon Saloon, Lighthouse.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of creativity within this region. Yeah. That they're getting the spillovers and the ideas that they require for their business.
Yeah, that's happening.
And that's probably untapped potential. And I think there was an idea of, was it along the River Quarter? I think that there's going to be an agri-food craft.
So what we have is the Abbey Quarter. Yeah. So that's the old Limericks site. So I think it's about 17 million in funding up to that being given, But the plan is to have, I think it's an agri, trying to bring in a design element as well. Yeah. There's other things in plan for that. So you have
your service sector, your tourism sector, you have your creative industries, and now you have your agri-food.
Yeah.
And it's the spillovers between these that would give the comparative advantage for Kilkenny relative to other places that other places won't be able to compete.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to work on as your strengths.
Yeah, I think you need to double down on that.
Yeah, and the creative industries will be very helpful for being a mix of spillovers into IT areas.
Okay.
And things like animation.
I think a key thing in terms of Limerick's success has been leadership. I thought particularly with the merging of city and county council and extending the city boundary, it just brought in a more streamlined process for a lot of things. So that was a smart move. Going back, even referencing the sugar daddy thing earlier, I don't necessarily think you need the likes of a Michael Noonan or even John Moran. I think that people that have been spoken about here up on the stage, the unsung heroes, it was leadership across all different aspects, not just within government and city council, but also within industry. But within industry as well, like the likes of the CEOs of Northern Trust and Dell and Viscon and all these big companies coming in. So there was leadership coming from various directions, which was key. And I think that that's very important in terms of getting things done. I think it has to be recognised as well that, like what you said, work to your strengths. There's strengths within the economy that are often considered sometimes to be a positive or a negative. So if you think about it in the context of, and again, what we spoke about earlier, one plan in terms of the planning framework spoke about where we were going to live. Another plan was telling us about the jobs that we were going to have. But it's a chicken and an egg argument, in case of so a lot of people believe you create the jobs and then the housing will follow. And other people believe that, well, no, you need to build high-spec apartments to grow and revitalise the city centre and to incentivise people, high-skilled, high earners, to come and live within these regions. So it is a difficult argument that you have to ask yourself. But we have done a lot in Limerick, but we cannot become complacent. We have a long way to go. There's lots more to be developed. Similar to other places, we have problems in our housing sector. We have problems with prices rising faster in the county rather than the city regions. We have a lack of urban apartments. If you look to the planning permission that has been granted recently, it's showing a worryingly trend that it will continue for a while. And I think, this is something that we have to realise. Like, there's no incentive currently at the moment with the way prices are. And the demand largely based on where we want to live is going to be dictated by growth in population, urbanisation, and the size of the average family, which is falling, household. And all of that is leading towards the argument that we need urban apartments. But the thing is that the price that they are, particularly in Limerick at the moment, there's basically no profit margin for developers. There's no incentive for them to come in and actually develop these units. So the question has to be asked then is, who takes leadership here? Does the government step in and try to create some incentive? So there's all but you can look at that as a positive as well, because our house prices are quite low. So therefore you can see it's an incentive to bring people into the region and for investors to come into the region. So it can be argued like there's a positive and negative to everything you look at. Kilkenny also has a situation where your housing costs are quite low at the moment as well. So that can be a benefit. But in terms of the donut effect though, which we've had, where we've had hollowing out of city centres and more people moving out to the county regions, that's a problem that has to be addressed. And that's only going to come with leadership and continued investment and implementing practical policy. That is key, practical policy, because a lot of the times you see these reports come out from government, thousands of euros are spent on them, and then the suggestions that are made within them aren't being applied. And a lot of that is because they pass the argument that we have a change in government, so it's put on the shelf, but we look to that again in another couple of years' time, but then they don't, and then they just issue a new report 5 years later that says the exact same thing the report 5 years previously did, and again we're in a circle.
Okay, I'm going to move on. That kind of nearly there now, but in terms of the IDA supported jobs in Kilkenny about 5.4. In the southeast region about 5.4%, and that means that there's about 7,500 jobs missing. So I think sometimes the idea always want to push a positive thing, and then if someone says negative, it's like the ostrich head in the sand, So I just think, is there anything that we can do in terms of, I think Frank, you had it there where you're speaking about, and maybe I'm right or wrong, but just let me know what you think. Number one, as Frank is saying, double down on the industry that you have and start portraying those things to the idea to help them help us. And from Mike, you were saying that the whole idea of Limerick, that you didn't stay insular, you didn't go around talking to each other, you went out and you went and looked for the stuff. You went outside.
Yeah, everything that we've done has been working hand in hand with the industries that are on our doorstep.
Right.
So talking to all the chief executives, seeing what contacts that they have, can they do introductions for us? And we would work then hand in hand. So we're not working against the IDA, we work very, very closely with them and help them in any way possible. So when an IDA delegation comes in, we'll go and meet them. And a typical example is, you take somebody like WordPress. When we met them first, they were looking at Cork, Limerick, Belfast, and Galway. And at that particular point in time, they were actually heading towards Belfast. Right. So the IDA's job is to bring them to the shores of Ireland. It's then up to each town or city to win that investment for yourself. And what we've been good at doing is talking to these companies and getting the message across. We say, well, if you come to Limerick, we have an educated workforce. We have a local authority that's open for business.
You can give them figures. You can give them.
Yeah. And we have office space that may be suitable for you to bring you in small, 4, 5, 10 jobs initially, and let you grow to 100, 200, 300, whatever your plan is, and make it easy for them. So we're not hitting them with leases for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. We give them a license for 12 months. And that's very, very attractive to them. And so for a period, roughly this time last year, we had a period of 7 weeks where we had 7 different IDA announcements each week, or over 1 a week over 7 weeks, culminating in several thousand jobs. And already, like last month alone, there was 900 jobs announced in Limerick. So, and that's how it's done. It's by working with these companies and talking to the chief executives of the large companies in the region and working their contacts, getting them to introduce us to them. And that's what I mean, going out and meeting them, and that's what we've been doing.
I suppose just my last question really is, do you think that Kilkenny would benefit from having a digital officer?
Certainly would. But Kilkenny, when I hear Kilkenny, when we're talking about strategy or we're talking about in different meetings or different fora, to me, Kilkenny design is the first thing that comes in, design and fashion. And obviously, you have Plan B on your doorstep. You're kind of the biggest agri-food company in the country at this stage. But you have a number of other companies here, I'm sure, that I'm not even aware of. And are they being approached or milked? And that's it. A digital officer. So in Limerick, we have, it's the first digital city, and we have the Georgian Innovation Quarter, and we're looking at converting that into kind of a digital quarter. As an attractive centre for these IT companies to come in, get set up, and drive on. And that's the approach that we have. It may or may not be the ideal thing for ye, but if you were to say, right, take digital and fashion and design together, and what we're doing, and what we've an application in under the Action Plan for Jobs for 2.5 million, and hopefully we'll hear next week whether we're successful or not. We're quite hopeful. Is we're building a digital collaboration centre next to Engine in City Centre in the Georgian Innovation District, and that has been led by it's by the multinationals in the region who want to use the existing technology that's available within the region from the indigenous sector. Because if you take somebody like Analog, for instance, if they want to get a new supplier in, it's going to take 5 or 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks for them to get approved through the purchasing channels. Whereas if they come to someone like Innovate and say, right, I have this project, I want to get a team working on that, we'll act as the procurer for that, and we can get a team working on that within a week. And so that's our plan with the new in the new centre for the technology sector. And that will drive on then the innovation quarter to technical, and MII has been played a valid role in putting all that together. So the answer to your question is, does Kilkenny need a digital officer? It certainly would be a help.
Anyone else?
I wouldn't say a digital officer, but it's a smart specialisation officer.
Smart specialisation.
Well, what that is just basically what are the strengths that Kilkenny has, and where can you build upon and focus in on them, and what get the spillovers right. And that it might be about the digital economy, it might be about creative industries, but it's you can't go too far away from where your knowledge bases are, and that's critical. And we're talking a bit about Limerick. Like I might be wrong in this, but I don't think there's a crane working over Limerick at the moment, is there?
Taken down 3 weeks ago.
So one way of knowing about private activity and private investment is the crane count. And
and that's what I said at the start. I mean, our property market was broken, and that's why 2030 was established to come in and take on some of these key sites because private investment wasn't going. And as Karen said, even still there are apartments for sale in city centre Limerick for €100,000, and you can't build them for that.
Mm.
So, but we do need investment to come in, be it government funding or additional, to build those apartments, good quality apartments. There will be demand there for them because the jobs are being created. Where I'm based in Engine, WordPress are in that. They have 100 people employed at the moment. They expect that to go to 200. 50% of those, their employees are now living in city centre.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same for a number of other companies.
Like a key problem for all our cities at the moment is getting residential living within the city core. We've spent the last 30, 40 years moving out to suburbs, and we've drained actually our cities of key resources, and it's a huge problem. We have cranes in Cork. We've a good few of them.
We've cranes in Kilkenny. I saw a heron in Butler Garden yesterday.
Most of this has been for student accommodation or offices at the moment, but it's not for residential.
Okay.
We have a huge problem nationally at addressing this issue, and the private market at the moment, I can't see, looking at the economic incentives, how this can be solved privately. We need much more of a public role here, I think. In housing.
Yeah, I don't know if the digital officer is the answer for Kilkenny, because I think for us it's key in our goal to become a lighthouse smart city.
What do you mean by a lighthouse smart city?
So basically, what we have this agenda at the moment, and probably Mike can talk a lot about it, probably more so than I could. But it's basically utilising elements of the city, like our Jordan Quarter that we have, where we have a lot of vacant units. And the idea is to place sensors at various spots around the city, and effectively the city becomes a digital hive, where various different entities and sectors speak to each other. So it feeds into things where the sensors teach us things about the air quality and the soil quality. It teaches us things about congestion, about traffic. So the sectors within the city start to talk to each other, and as a result we become much more efficient. And I think the digital officer plays a huge role in that component.
And you can see some of that data on the Limerick.ie site.
Yeah.
It's really cool, actually.
And just on that, the digital officer, and again, I think the name, I don't want to get caught up in names. You call him a digital officer, we call him a lot of different things, but he's also the EU officer as such, and that's why he's away a lot, because the funding that's required to do the kind of lighthouse strategy is coming from European funding that we got on what's called a city exchange program, 4 million to roll out that kind of smart city within the area. So it wears many different hats, and I think you could call it whatever you like.
Last question then. You have an action plan for jobs in the Midwest region.
Yeah.
We have an action plan for jobs in the southeast. But does Kilkenny need a 2030 plan?
I mean, the regional plan, there's two things, as I said. The 2030 plan is to focus specifically on Limerick City Centre.
Sure.
The action plan for jobs in the Midwest covers Clare, Tipperary, Limerick, and North Kerry. And so on certain things we take a regional approach. So on the development of things like industry sector. So the whole development of the whole film sector, we look at that from a Midwest and an action plan for jobs. But possibly the development of the tech sector. But 2030 is specifically city centre. If you're looking at the development of Kilkenny City, well then I think probably something like a 2030 plan, or 2040 maybe at this stage. 2030 is coming faster than any of us would like to appreciate. Or 2035, whatever. It certainly is an exercise worth doing.
I think we need to wait to see what comes out in the regional economic and spatial strategies, to see if a lot of the issues that have been highlighted across different public forums are being listened to. Now, I know the economist who works for the three regional assemblies, and I do believe that there has been opportunity to address those issues within the frameworks, but I can't believe everything he tells me. Like he's going to hold things back sometimes, and he might have just been telling me what I wanted to hear. So I wouldn't until I actually see the first draft. So I think in terms of planning a strategy for Kilkenny, should hold off until we see what the actual practical application of policies laid out in the regional framework. Now there's obviously metropolitan city plans coming from within that as well that will focus on the big areas. So I'm assuming that the regional strategy will focus more so on the smaller cities. So I think we should hold off. But I think a big thing is the whole idea of the technological university, and I think that there are still questions that need to be raised around that in terms of Carlow IT and Waterford IT, and the fact of the funding mechanism for it.
The poorest of all.
It's like 1.4% of the overall
It's pittance.
spend. Yeah. So questions have to be raised there, and it's also been built under a PPP element. So there's going to be, I think the money is going to come on board from 2020. And whether or not the PPP is the right way to go for this project, there's questions around that I think is worthwhile asking as well.
Just in the technological university, just as that was raised, there's no point relabeling Waterford IT or Carlow IT as a technological university.
Yeah,
it has to act like a university. It has to research like a university, and it has to have expertise that can drive, I suppose, ideas within the region. Going back to your, does Kilkenny need a plan? Absolutely needs a plan, because for places that aren't the capital city or aren't a very large city, this is going to be driven bottom up. Yeah. And you need
grassroots to grass top.
Yeah, it's grassroots, absolutely. And you need local leaders that will drive it. And I think one of the key problems that we have in Ireland at the moment is the lack of local autonomy. We have the least local autonomy of all countries in Europe. And what we have is a lot of local shouting at the moment, screaming in some ways to the national bodies, going, "We've no joined up thinking." You're talking to IDA, you're talking to Enterprise Ireland, but then what road infrastructure do you need? What rail infrastructure do you need to actually address the needs of businesses? And these decisions have to be made locally. They should be made locally, because that's where all the knowledge is. Yeah. It's at a local level, and currently the resources aren't there, I don't think, for local government to be able to respond in the ways that are required. So absolutely, I think Kilkenny needs a plan. It needs to get local heads together, and it needs to, I think, lobby for more local autonomy to be able to drive its own future, because this is about places driving their own future. I wouldn't wait for the top down, because it ain't going to come.
It's grassroots, grass off straight away. I'm going to open it up to the floor if anyone has any questions. The lady in the front there.
I've spent a good deal of my professional life in Central Europe, which is recovering from the lack of maintenance under communism. And a couple of successful cities have put very simple schemes in effect to renovate old buildings for residential, for business, knowing that part of their income was tourism, and therefore people wanted to see old buildings. And that's certainly true, I think, of Ireland. Are there, for instance, I'm from Cork, are there any tax incentive coordinated schemes to renovate and to open up an incredible amount of vacant buildings?
Well, there's living over the shop incentive schemes at a local level. I think one of the biggest problems that you have in our cities at the moment, in terms of why we have such dereliction across it, is very much because the tools actually are at local level. Like, there's a derelict tax levy that it's there since 1990. There's a site levy tax that was implemented last year, and it's at 3% of the market values to increase to 8%. The derelict site one is, I think, at about 3%. But the reality is they're not being enforced. Now, maybe it is happening in Limerick, but it's not happening in Cork. You can just walk along, and there's buildings that have been derelict for a long period of time. And if we were actually collecting this money, we were enforcing it. And if we weren't doing that, it was actually, if we just take it over because local authorities can buy them, we need much stronger stick action going on at a very local level, because that's a key problem. We've got this dereliction happening. It shouldn't be happening. People are tying up resources within our city, and it's resulting in an awful lot of people moving out for housing then. because it's not been released.
Just on the derelict sites, I think while the legislation was there, that has been changed over the last year or two, and it's the fact that the penalty by leaving a site derelict is far more severe now over the last 2 years. And I know in Limerick we have one or two issues with, without naming them, just very large property owners that have one or two key sites in the middle of town. And we've done everything possible, even trying to use CPO to get access to those sites. But because of the financial power and might of the individuals involved, it just proves very, very difficult. In relation to the type of buildings that we have up in the Georgian quarter, the Georgian Innovation District, and that, there is a separate tax incentive scheme for people who buys any of those houses and wishes to renovate them. I suppose the downside is that most of those are listed buildings, and there's associated costs with that, with being a listed building that can be a little bit bigger, higher than maybe with normal property. But there is a strong push to get as many people, get as many of those properties back in circulation again as possible.
And I think you should visit the Hole in the Wall today if you get a chance.
I'll be there.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? We have a question down the back on the right there. From Limerick, yeah?
From Limerick,
Hey.
yeah. 1 and 2. But no, what I was going to say is I really appreciate the whole panel talking about utilizing the resources that we have in Limerick, building on the skills that we have, very realistic policy plans. On the other end of the spectrum, the hypothetical, wouldn't it be great? I'd like to know your input on acquiring one of these IT, whales like an Apple or Facebook. Cork has Apple. We're hearing stories about planning permission falling through in Athenry, and would it be not only feasible but beneficial if we did get one of these, or would it become another Dell situation?
It's an interesting question. I know I was talking to a guy from Doug Powell is his name. I mentioned it before, but Doug is from a company called IBM. Sorry, I couldn't think of him. Doug Powell is the head of the IBM. He's the head of design in IBM, and they moved to Austin, Texas. And when I met him about 2 years back, I said, "Why did you move to Austin, Texas?" And he said, "Oh, it's great culture there, and we can move all our team to Austin, Texas. And Austin, Texas is great because housing prices ain't that much, and the cost of a pint is a lot cheaper. So what do they get? A very young workforce, and they don't have to pay as much, so it becomes incredibly competitive for them. So I think that's really is, it's an interesting area to look at. I think from my perspective, definitely.
Well, yeah. It's, do you want to go, Mike?
Sorry, Frank.
No, I mean, sorry, yeah. Getting the likes of the Dells, the IBMs, and those big, the Microsoft, and those very, very large tech companies, it's very hard to sway them away from the large population centres. And it's a bit like some of the conversation that was had here earlier on. They want access to an immediate workforce, and even if you look at Limerick, the population in city and county is about 190,000. We extend that out then to within kind of a 50-kilometre radius, that goes up to about 500,000. And the one thing that they will say when they look at Limerick and its size and scale is, you're not really big enough for us. That's why they'll go to Dublin, and they don't mind paying the rates in Dublin, because even by international standards, they're still relatively cheap. And that's what you're up against. And Dublin, is small by international standards. And Austin, I've been there. Austin is just a slightly bigger version of Limerick. The city, a river running up through the middle of it. The climate most of the year is somewhat similar.
Full of festivals.
Sorry?
Full of festivals.
And I was there, yeah.
Festival every month.
It's also got Willie Nelson now and then.
Yeah. Willie works as well. Yeah.
So we don't. If and I suppose coming back to what you said about the Galway scenario where planning drifted on and all that type of thing. We have, as a local authority, what we have done in situations, we did it with Troy Studios, where we used a Part 8 Part 8 planning instrument, which means that if the local authority is developing an enterprise or building or taking on a project, the members can vote on the planning themselves, and ultimately I stand corrected, but I think it means that it can't be appealed to a board finale. And by doing that, it kind of speeds up the process. There's no development charges. on the project either. And because on the likes of Tri Studios, because the council owned the actual building, we were able to use that as a mechanism to get the planning through and kick on the project at a much lower cost than it would ordinarily have been. Now, the work has to be carried out by the local authority as well, past that. But there are probably there are mechanisms that that's what I'm saying about kind of innovation, is about looking at things a little bit differently and doing things a little bit differently. Obviously, in line with regulation and law and everything that's there. But data centres such as that, I'm not sure how many jobs they actually create. And is that particularly what you want? I know we've talked to a few potential companies that were looking at establishing data centres, even floating data centres. We're open to any approach if it makes financial sense.
Yeah, like I suppose when you think about large companies, is that I suppose Apple does come to mind in Cork, right? It employs 5,000 people. It's fantastic. It's it's a great income earner for the city. Particularly the spillover, the multiplier effect that you get from the service industries, even around the incomes that are generated within Apple. But imagine if Apple left.
Yeah, scary.
What a nuclear effect that would have in Cork.
Dropping 15,000 jobs, really.
Well, you're probably looking at something like that. 15, 20,000 jobs probably gone straight away. Really, that would have such a seismic effect on the economy of Cork. So you got to be careful as well that there has to be related diversification happening. There has to be less risk, and that's why when we think about smaller cities, it is about specializing, but it's also about trying to have some specialized diversifying going on. That there's related industries there. That if one goes, the whole thing doesn't fall down. I think if Apple went tomorrow, Cork would be in big trouble.
Just have time for one more question, then, because we have to wrap up. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent seminar here. I was taking my Limericks talk about its Georgian structure and the stuff that's going on in, and it seems to me that politics is becoming more and more less about the economy, and the environment is taking precedent. And it's the urban structure, the way cities are formed, that it's the key, in my opinion, economic driver. Kilkenny has managed to preserve its traditional urban structure. It's still coherent in a way that Limerick, sadly, has dissipated much of its heritage, its traditional heritage. And it's sort of a giant Ponzi scheme of inconstant creativity that characterises much of modern architecture. I think it's the local, paying attention to our local structure, our local traditions, etc., is the way to go, and not starting importing these kinds. And with all due respect to Sean O'Leary, who used to teach me, and Merritt Bouchard, who runs the School of Architecture, these kind of interventions don't make a city. They in fact they almost cannibalize, or they on the existing structures of cities.
Okay.
Well, yeah, just on the heritage aspect of the thing, heritage is such an important driver. Cultural development. We see that even great example I think of it in Cork is Namanagel. A fantastic centre in terms of creating social innovation within the local community. There's a big discourse happening actually in Cork at the moment around the role of architecture and the influence that it has in, I suppose, improving people's lives. And it's become a very rich conversation actually down there. And largely has been, the catalyst of that has been, I don't know whether people have heard about the OPW walls, but they're thinking of, they're planning on building walls within the city in Byron around River Lee for flood protection. And the amount of opposition to this has been incredible. And it is driven by heritage, it is driven by, the river is extremely important in the shaping of our lives, the shaping of creativity within the city itself, and also how we enjoy our surrounds and the environment in which we operate in. we sometimes forget how important that is as a source of creativity, largely because we can't put numbers on it. But there's no doubt about it, it is very important. And I think going forward, again, from a very locally driven, is that people aren't actually happy with a lot of development that has happened over the last 30, 40 years within our cities, and that we need to appreciate our cities more. And I think actually from Limerick's perspective, in terms of that plan, they are returning to the importance of the river, turning the city towards the river.
Yeah, and Kilkenny is beginning to do the same.
Yeah, and hopefully they'll wake up in Cork, because it is such an important part of people's lives, and that can't be ignored.
I think for Limerick, it's important to recognise that we're not fully there yet. We have a long way to go, but we are starting to address the vacancy problem, particularly within city centre. So from 2011 to 2016, we had a reduction of 10% in the amount of vacant units. And I do think particularly for the historical aspect and the Georgian quarter of the city, the whole idea of, I think, rules and regulations and planning often prevent those areas being developed, because objections can be placed quite easily when a historical context comes into it. And there are a lot of other European cities, I think Paris is a good one to look to, where they've taken the idea of just keeping the front facade of the buildings and then building basically a new unit behind it, but just to keep the whole cohesive look and to retain some part of the historical aspect of the city, which I think is good. And I think you're right, it is all about building a community feeling within the city centre. And I think even the initiative that we had to encourage people to take up basically vacant units and urbanise the city, we called it the Living City Initiative. So it was all about bringing life into the city centre. And I think that if you look to the likes of Paris, again, they've done it fantastic, because they have some regions where it's all urban apartments. So the apartments are kept quite small, and then they have these communal gardens and communal playground areas, and they're all built into the historical context of the city. So I do think if we could replicate that in some way, it would be fantastic. But of course, keep the historical aspect, which is very important as well.
Good guys, I'm going to actually have to wrap it up. So I'd just like to thank our panel, Frank, Trina and Mike. Enjoy the festival, and we'll see you around the town. See you. Cheers guys.
Yeah. It was excellent.